I guess I was introduced. I didn't hear anything, so we will just... I'm coming in out on the blues without knowing what's going on. Thank you. Can you all hear me? Is the microphone on? Yes. Okay. Thank you, Dean Grams, Professor Weiss, and of course, Katie Battle, whose tenacity and go-get attitude definitely made it possible for me to be here tonight. Dear friend, I am always very impressed and particularly honored to speak to you here tonight. And so thank you, Katie and Dean Grams and Professor Weiss for asking me to speak. My presentation is not the result of a very well-researched academic paper, but it is a fruit of my soul searching in trying to make some sense out of being a human guinea pig. I am trying to explain logically something that defies logic because it deals with feelings, it deals with the innermost of my soul, and many people cannot understand it. I am not a religious person. I am not an angel, nor am I a heroine. I am just a human being who survived many deadly experiments, who was treated as a subhuman, yet remained human, and who has been fortunate to discover the secret for self-healing, self-empowerment, namely forgiveness. 69 years ago, I was merely a disposable human subject. If I would have died, I would have been replaced by twins arriving on the next transport. A disposable human being from Auschwitz who could not be disposed of by the Nazi and Auschwitz doctors is here to speak to you, people in the medical profession, scientists, nurses, doctors, about ethics in medicine. As I look around this room, which I barely can see, I'm trying to see faces, but it's difficult. I realize that I am in the company of many academic experts, some in law, some in human behavior, and many in medical science. I also realize that you have asked me to speak here today, not because of my great academic credentials, but because you want to know how does it feel to be a human guinea pig, used and abused in human experimentation. I applaud your effort. This is the most appropriate tribute to the memory of those who died, including my twin sister, Miriam Moses Zeiger. My speech is divided in 3 parts. 1, how I survived Auschwitz. 2, how it feels to be a human guinea pig and the lessons for ethics today. And 3, self-liberation and healing through forgiveness. And after that, we might have time. Of course, we will try for questions and answers. In May of 1944, we, the Moses family, my father, Alexander Moses, age 44, my mother, Jaffa Moses, age 38, my older sister, Edith Moses, age 14, my middle sister, Alice Moses, age 12, and Miriam and I, identical twins who were only 10 years old, were loaded onto a cattle car. We came from a tiny village of about 100 families called Ports in Transylvania, Romania. In 1940, our village was occupied by the Hungarian army. So we came actually as part of the Hungarian transport who was sent to the Auschwitz death camp. It was the dawn of an early spring morning in 1944. Our cattle car train came to a sudden stop. I could hear a lot of Germans yelling orders outside. We were packed in the crowded cattle car like sardines, and above the press of bodies, I could see nothing but a little patch of gray sky through the barbed wires in the window. As soon as we stepped down from the cattle car onto a cement platform, my mother grabbed my twin sister and me by the hand. We were her youngest children, and she hoped somehow that she could protect us. I was standing on that little strip of land called the selection platform, maybe 10 minutes, and in my childish curiosity, I looked around, trying to figure out what that place was. Where suddenly I realized that my father and two older sisters were gone. I never saw them again. As Miriam and I were clutching my mother's hand, a Nazi trooper, an SS trooper, hurried by shouting in German, "Twins, twins." He stopped to look at Miriam and me because we were dressed alike and we looked very much alike, and he demanded to know if we were twins. "Are they twins?" he asked. "Is it good?" asked my mother. "Yes," nodded the SS. "Yes, they are twins," said my mother. Without any warning or explanation, he grabbed Miriam and me away from our mother. Our screaming and pleading fell on deaf ears. I remember looking back and seeing my mother's arms stretched out in despair as she was pulled away. I never got to say goodbye to her, but I didn't really know that this would be the last time that we would see her. All this took 30 minutes from the time we stepped down from the cattle car. Miriam and I no longer had a family. We were all alone, and we had no idea what would happen to us. I will never forget that little strip of land called the selection platform. I measured it in 95. It measures 85 feet by 35 feet. A strip of land where millions of people were ripped apart from their families forever. I believe that there is no other strip of land like that anywhere in the world. We became part of a group of little girls, all twins, 13 sets of little girls, aged 2 to 16, and one mother was permitted to stay with her daughters. We were marched to a huge building and made to sit naked for most of the day. Late in the afternoon, our processing began. We, the twins, were given short haircuts. The mother's head was shaved. Our dresses were returned with a huge red cross painted on the back because it was to identify us as human subjects for experiments. The mother was given striped prison uniforms, so to have our own hair and our own clothes was a privilege which the twins were granted. Then we lined up for registration and tattooing. When my turn came, I decided that I would give them as much trouble as I possibly could. 4 people, 2 Nazis and 2 women prisoners, restrained me with all their strength while they heated a gadget, looked like a pan, and they heated it over the flame of a lamp. When it got really hot, they dipped it into ink, and they burned into my left arm, dot by dot, the capital letter A-7063. Miriam became capital A-7064. Auschwitz was the only Nazi camp that tattooed its inmates. My husband is a 4-year survivor of Buchenwald. He does not have a tattoo. Years later, Miriam told me that in addition to creating a general confusion, I beat the Nazi holding my arm. I don't remember biting anyone. I must have blocked it out of my mind. After all, I was raised to be a nice girl. And as we know, nice girls and nice boys don't bite. To look back at my childhood is to remember my experiences as a human guinea pig in Auschwitz, in Mengele's lab. To recount such painful memories is to relive the horrors of human experimentation, where people were used only as objects to research. I envision the chimneys, the smell of the burning flesh, the medical injections, the endless blood taking, the tests, the dead bodies that were all around us, the hunger, the rats. Nothing in that place was close to human existence. In my opinion, nothing on the face of this earth can prepare anyone for a place like Auschwitz. At age 10, Miriam and I became part of a very special group of children, twins, used as human guinea pigs. 1,500 sets of twins were used in Mengele's experiments. That first night when Miriam and I went to the latrine, there on the filthy floor were the scattered corpses of 3 children. This is when I realized that that could happen to Miriam and me unless I did something to prevent it. So right then and there, I made a silent pledge that I will do whatever is within my power to make sure that Miriam and I shall not end up on that filthy latrine floor. In the barrack, we were children aged 2 to 16, huddled in our filthy bunk beds, crawling with lice and rats. We were starved for food, starved for human kindness, and starved for the love of the mothers and fathers we once had. We had no rights, but we had a fierce determination to live one more day, to survive one more experiment. No one tried to minimize the risk to our lives, and no one showed us any respect or consideration. On the contrary, we knew we were there to be used as guinea pigs at the mercy of Mengele and the Nazi doctors. We were used in a variety of experiments. 3 times a week, we would walk to Auschwitz I, where we would be placed naked in a room for 6 to 8 hours. Every part of my body was measured, compared to charts, compared to my twin sister. These particular experiments were not dangerous, but they were unbelievably demeaning, and even in Auschwitz, I couldn't cope with the fact that I was treated like a nobody, like a nothing. The only way that I could cope with it was by blocking it out of my mind. Even at that young an age, we knew we had to submit to Dr. Mengele's experiments. We were reduced to the lower form of human existence, just a mass of living, breathing cells. Our families were gone. Our lives depended on being a cooperative mass of living cells. There was no escape from it. Our childhood were gone, snatched away by the Nazi doctor. Our bodies were fodder for Mengele's experiments. All we had were our lives, and I concentrated all my efforts, all my talents, all my being on one single thing: survival. 3 times a week, we were taken to another lab that I call the blood lab. There, they would tie both of my arms to restrict the blood flow, take a lot of blood from my left arm, and give me a minimum of 5 injections into my right arm. Those were the deadly ones. After one of those injections, I became very ill with a very high fever, a fact I desperately tried to hide because the rumor in the camp was that anyone taken to the hospital never came back. On the next visit to the blood lab, they did not tie my arms for blood taking. Instead of that, they measured my fever, and I knew I wasn't in trouble. I was taken to the hospital. Next morning, Dr. Mengele came in with 4 other doctors. The hospital was another barrack filled with people who looked more dead than alive. Dr. Mengele never examined me. He just looked at my fever chart, and he declared, laughing sarcastically, "Too bad. She's so young. She has only 2 weeks to live." I was all alone. The doctors I had did not want to save my life. They wanted me dead. Miriam was not with me, and I missed her so very much because she was the only kind and loving person in Auschwitz that I could cuddle up with when I was hungry, cold, and ill. Even though I was very sick and all alone, I refused to die, and I made a second silent pledge that I will do everything within my power to prove Dr. Mengele wrong, survive, and be reunited with Miriam. For the next 2 weeks, I was between life and death. I remember waking up on the barrack floor. I was crawling because I no longer could walk. And I was crawling to reach a faucet with water at the other end of the barrack. This barrack was not allocated any food, water, or medicine, since people were brought there to die. As I was crawling, I would fade in and out of consciousness, and I kept telling myself, I must survive, I must survive. After 2 weeks, my fever broke, and I felt much better. It took me another 3 weeks before my fever chart showed normal, and amazingly, I was released and reunited with Miriam. But the happiness of our reunion was short-lived. Miriam looked just like the living dead I left in the other barrack. She was sick, and she lost her desire to fight for her own life. It was very easy to die in Auschwitz. Surviving was a full-time job. The will to live made the difference often between life and death. Next day, I volunteered to be a food carrier from the kitchen to the barrack so I could organize, which in camp language meant stealing from the Nazis. I wanted to organize raw potatoes because they seemed to be the panacea in Auschwitz. As I entered the kitchen, I saw a long table with sacks of potatoes underneath it. I hesitated for a moment because the rumor was that anyone caught stealing would be hanged. I finally conquered my fear and I bent down. I could feel 2 small potatoes in my hand when somebody grabbed me by my head, pulled me up, and yelled into my face, "It's not nice to steal." I almost burst into laughter because I expected to be dragged to the gallows and hanged. I just learned a very important lesson, that as long as Dr. Mengele wanted us alive, no one dared harm us. Next day, I tried my organizing skills again, and I became the happy owner of 3 raw potatoes. We boiled them at night after the supervisors went to sleep, and I became a very good organizer. We had potatoes 3 to 4 times a week. The steady diet of potatoes gave Miriam enough strength to fight for her own life. When I was in Auschwitz, I thought that the whole world was one big concentration camp. Children lose their point of reference very fast. One day, end of August, I saw an airplane flying over Auschwitz. It was flying very low. I could see the American flag on one of the wings. That gave me the realization that somebody was trying to free us. That knowledge reinforced my determination to live one more day, survive one more experiment. It also gave me the hope that someday we will be free. And hope in Auschwitz was in very short supply. The air raids and fighting by the Allied forces continued and greatly increased until liberation. On January 27, 1945, just 4 days before my 11th birthday, Auschwitz was liberated by the Soviet army. We were free. We were alive. We have triumphed over unbelievable evil. The glory of that day will be forever engraved in my heart, and the echoes from Auschwitz will always be part of my life. My silent pledge that first night in the latrine became a reality, and that was an unbelievable experience. Part 2. I, Eva Kor, a survivor of Mengelé's experiment, have learned that human rights and human experimentation is an issue that needs to be addressed and taught. To those of you who are involved in medicine, the medical profession, physicians, research scientists, ethicists, congratulations. You have chosen a wonderful but difficult profession. Wonderful because you know that you can help save human life. Difficult because you are walking a very narrow line. You have been trained to use good, cool judgment and clear logic. But you cannot forget that you are dealing with human beings. The moment you forget and cross that narrow line, you are heading in the direction of the Nazi doctors and the Joseph Mengeles. I hope that what was done to me will never happen to another human being. Those of you who do research must obey the international law. Scientists should continue. Nurses, you should continue in doing research because I personally have benefited from your work. My son, Dr. Alex Kor, in 1987, was diagnosed with an advanced case of testicular cancer that metastasized in his lungs and in his lymph nodes. I am personally grateful to medical research that found a cure for my son. I want to thank Dr. Einhorn at Indiana University Medical Center for saving my son's life. I am personally aware both of the benefits and the drawbacks. Medical science can benefit mankind, but it also can greatly be abused. The scientists must make a moral commitment to never violate a person's human right and human dignity. You who doing research must respect the wishes of your subject. Every time you as a scientist are involved in human experimentation, you should put yourself in the place of your subject and see how you would feel. You also must remember that the research is done for the sake of mankind and not for the sake of science. You must never detach yourself from your patients and the subject you serve. If you do not know what to do in difficult situations, just ask yourself, would I want to be treated this way? And if I was one of these research subjects, and if the answer is no, then you are doing something wrong. I hope with all my heart that our sad stories will compel the international community to devise laws and rules that govern human experimentation. The dignity of all human beings must be respected, preserved, and protected at all costs. Life without it is a mere existence. And I experience such loss of dignity every day as a human guinea pig in Dr. Mengele's lab. These same doctors have taken an oath to help and protect human life, yet they violated it every single day. From 1944 to 1995, 51 years, I felt deep emotional pain. I was a victim who was angry with the world and who could not be really happy. I was physically liberated from Auschwitz in 1945. Emotionally, but I carried the pain until 1995 when I forgave the Nazis, and this is what happened. After liberation, Miriam and I were in refugee camps for 9 months. We arrived back home to our village to find nothing but 3 crumpled pictures on a bedroom floor. And that was all that was left of our family. We were taken in by an aunt who lost her family, who married a guy who lost his family. We lived in communist Romania from 1945 till 1950. During that time, I learned that communists had beautiful slogans, but freedom was still just a dream. We wanted to leave Romania for Israel, but they didn't let us leave. For 2 years, we struggled to get our exit visa. And then Romanian government took away all our land, property, and everything we had, permitting us to carry only the clothes we could wear. So I wore 3 dresses and a winter coat in the middle of the summer. I stood in line for that coat 20 hours, and I was not going to leave it behind. In 1950, we arrived in Israel. After 2 years in an agricultural school, both Miriam and I were drafted into the Israeli army. Miriam studied and became a registered nurse. I stayed in the engineering corps, reaching the rank of sergeant major for 8 years. In 1960, I met and married an American tourist from Terre Haute, Indiana. He's also a Holocaust survivor who was liberated in Buchenwald by an American lieutenant colonel from Terre Haute, Indiana. So when the war ended, he came to Terre Haute, Indiana in 1946. I married my husband in 1960, so I came from Tel Aviv to Terre Haute, Indiana. Quite a jump. Miriam got married in 1958, and in 1960 she was expecting her first baby. She developed severe kidney infections that did not respond to any antibiotic. With a second pregnancy in 1963, her kidney infections got worse, and her doctors in Israel found out that Miriam's kidney never grew larger than the size of a 10-year-old child. After her third pregnancy, her kidneys failed. And in 1987, I donated my left kidney. We were a perfect match, but a year later, Miriam developed cancerous polyps in her bladder, the only one among 2,000 transplantees to develop such cancer. Doctors in Israel said if we could find our Auschwitz files, that might help them figure out why Miriam was the only one to develop cancer, because they assumed that something that she was injected in Auschwitz combined with the anti-rejection medication to create the cancer. We never found our files. We have never found out what we were injected with. Miriam died on June 6, 1993. I came home from an open house as a realtor on a Sunday afternoon. There was a message on my answering machine from my brother-in-law telling me that my sister died. I immediately called Israel, asking my brother-in-law to wait for me, that I will catch the first flight to Israel. He told me not to bother, since the funeral was in 10 hours. Israel is 7 hours ahead from United States, and there was no wait for me to get there. It would have taken me at least 18 hours to arrive there. I pleaded with him to wait for me. I have never buried any family members. A simple human gesture. I wanted to touch her. I wanted to say goodbye to her. And I also wanted to say goodbye to my kidney. But he said no. I was devastated trying to cope with the death of my only sister. 3 or 4 weeks later, I received a telephone call from a professor at Boston College. His name is John Michalczyk. He called me not because he knew nothing about Miriam's death. He asked me to speak at a conference on Nazi medicine, and he wanted me to lecture to some doctors. I said to him that I love to lecture to doctors. He asked me why, and I explained that when I go to the doctors, they tell me that I am too fat, I don't eat the right food, I don't exercise enough, and then after they chew me out, I have to pay them. I told him that I would tell the good doctors what they do wrong, because in my opinion, they do plenty of things wrong, and I'm sure you nurses agree with me. And after I choose them out, I look forward for them to pay me. That is my way of getting even with the doctors. He said to me, okay, Eva, you like to joke, but when you come to Boston, it would be really nice if you could bring with you a Nazi doctor. I was stunned at his request. A Nazi doctor, I asked? Where do you think I can find one of those guys? Last time I looked in the yellow pages, they are not advertising there. He asked me to keep thinking maybe I would come up with some kind of way of finding a Nazi doctor. I remember that the last project that Miriam and I worked on together before she died, we finished it in 1992, was a documentary on the Mengele twins done by a German television network. In that documentary, there was a Nazi doctor by the name of Hans Munch. He was a doctor from Auschwitz, and I figured he might be still alive. I faxed a letter to Germany, to Frankfurt, telling the documentary center that Miriam just died, and would they please give me Dr. Munch's telephone number in the memory of Miriam. I had asked for that telephone number in 1992, but they refused to give it to me because they said they did not give out their guest telephone numbers. An hour or so later, I received a long sympathy letter and Dr. Munch's telephone number. Next, I called a friend of mine, Tony van Rantergem, a Dutch resistance fighter who speaks German. My mother tongue is Hungarian. And he called me back next day because he said, Dr. Munch is not coming to Boston, but he's willing to meet with me at his house in Germany. And he said a Dutch television would accompany us, pay for my expenses, and also film the interview. August of 1993, I was heading to Germany to meet a Nazi doctor. I was so nervous and even scared. What I remembered about Nazi doctors, I did not want to experience again. But I was curious what I might learn about our experiments because Dr. Munch was a friend of Dr. Mengeles. And I was curious also, why was this Nazi doctor willing to meet with me? When we arrived at his house, he treated me with the utmost kindness and respect. I was overwhelmed to be treated that kindly by a Nazi doctor. He said he knew nothing about our experiments because Dr. Mengele said that it was top secret, so he never shared any of the details. But he gave me a good interview for my Boston conference. And then, out of the blues, as we were sitting down, I said to him without ever planning to say that, Dr. Mengele, Dr. Munch, do you know anything about the gas chambers in Auschwitz? He immediately said, this is a nightmare that I live with every single day of my life, and began talking about the gas chamber. He said people would be told they would take a shower after the long trip, hang their clothes outside, and remember the hanger number. Then inside, the shower room was clean, polished. The shower heads were polished, and they spread a lot of perfume to make the place smell good. Once the shower room was packed to capacity, the doors closed. Dr. Munch was stationed outside, looking in through a peephole. The gas did not come from the shower heads. A hatch opened in the roof. Pellets that look like white pellets of gravel, that is the way Zyklon B was packed in cans. The can was opened outside the roof, dropped inside, and fell to the floor. It operated like dry ice. So the gas was rising from the floor. People were trying to get away from the rising gas, climbing on top of each other. The strongest people ended up on the top of the pile. When the people on the top of the pile stopped moving, Dr. Munch knew that everybody was dead, and he signed one death certificate stating how many people were just killed in the gas chamber. This was information I have never heard before. I immediately asked him to come with me to Auschwitz in 1995 when we would observe 50 years to the liberation of the camp. And he immediately said that he would love to. Well, I didn't know it was going to be that easy. So when I got back from Germany, I was so excited. I will have a document signed by a Nazi. I wanted to give him a gift of thanks, but I didn't know how to thank a Nazi doctor. Where does one look for a gift for a Nazi doctor? I went to the local Hallmark card shop to the thank you section, and I read many cards for about 2.5 hours. But I found no card appropriate for a Nazi doctor. Two ladies came up to me and asked me, "Are you finding what you are looking for?" I said, "Not really." So they asked me, "What are you looking for?" For a split moment, I thought maybe I should tell them. But then I realized they would think that I was crazy. I left the card shop, but I couldn't give up the idea of finding a meaningful gift for this Nazi doctor. So I went back to my life lesson number one. My life lesson number one is never, ever give up. For the next 10 months, I kept asking myself when I was driving, cooking, doing the laundry, when my mind wasn't too busy, what can I give this Nazi doctor? How can I thank this Nazi doctor? All kind of ideas popped into my mind until one day the following idea came into my mind, a simple letter of forgiveness from me to Dr. Munch. I knew immediately that this would be a meaningful gift and that Dr. Munch would like it. But what I discovered for myself was life-changing. I discovered that I had the power to forgive. No one could give me that power, and no one could take it away. It was all mine to use it in any way I pleased. Victims are always hurt, angry, feel hopeless, helpless, and powerless. I discovered that I had power I didn't know. I began writing my letter to Dr. Munch. I wrote many versions, working through a lot of pain, but I was concerned with my spelling, so I contacted my former English professor to correct my English. We met about 3 times, and then she said to me, "Eva, it's very nice that you are forgiving this Dr. Munch, but you really need to think about forgiving Mengele." I told her that this was just a little letter to Dr. Munch. She asked me to promise her that I would think about forgiving Mengele, and I did. Then as one is thinking about forgiving Mengele, I realized that I even had the power to forgive the angel of death, the God of Auschwitz. And I was not hurting anybody. And I concluded if I forgave Mengele, I might as well forgive everybody who has ever hurt me. It made me feel really good to have any power in my life and have any power over my future. Up to now, I was always reacting to what other people did to me. Now, I was initiating action, and I was not hurting anybody, so I had no reason not to do it. And it really made me feel good that I could decide something and have power over my life. We arrived in Auschwitz on January 27, 1995. Dr. Munch came with his daughter, son, and granddaughter. I came with my son, Alex, and daughter, Rina. Dr. Munch signed his document. I read mine and signed it, and I immediately felt all the pain was lifted from my shoulder. I was no longer a victim of Auschwitz, nor was I a prisoner of my tragic past. I was finally free from Auschwitz and free from Dr. Mengele. Forgiveness, in my opinion, is an act of self-healing, self-empowerment that brings serenity, freedom, and peace. Anger is a seed for war. Forgiveness is a seed for peace. I call forgiveness a modern miracle medicine. You don't need to belong to an HMO. There is no copay. It will not bust your budget. Anybody can afford it because it's free. It has no side effects. It works. You don't even need to fill out any informed consent forms, nor any compliance forms. For those people who are unsure if they will miss their pain, and if you don't like the way you feel as a free person, you can always go and take your pain back. In 1984, I founded an organization called Candles. In 1995, I founded Candles Holocaust Museum and Education Center in Terre Haute, Indiana. I like the name because candles are used as memorials and candles are used to illuminate. Candles in an acronym for Children of Auschwitz, Nazi deadly lab experiment survivors. We wanted to shed some light on the darkest chapter of the Holocaust, the chapter of children used as human guinea pigs. Somebody said that the light of one single candle can illuminate the darkness of the entire universe. I am asking every single one of you to remember the Nuremberg Code, and as you leave this presentation, wherever life takes you, become a glowing light, an example of caring and ethical behavior, and never use a human being in experiment without informed consent. I am hoping in some small way to send the world a message of hope, a message of healing, a message of forgiveness, and a message of peace. Thank you all who organized these lectures and sponsors and participants, user participants. As I look at you, I can see a powerful beam of light going out of this lecture room, spreading throughout the world to illuminate all the dark corners of human rights and human experimentation. Congratulations, you have survived my lecture. You are free. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So now you realize that a short, chubby, funny-speaking person can even impress you, wonderful people here. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Eva. If we can have the ushers and the mics come down, and we welcome questions anytime.
Let's see. Oh, there was here. Okay. Uh-oh. Something dropped out of my pocket. See, I'm loaded. Here is one, here is the other. That really means loaded. They're weighing down. As I bent down, one of them fell out. Okay.
You've never been able to find your parents, know what happened to your parents or your others?
No, no. Now, unfortunately, when I contacted the museum and I have contacted people who could help, there is no existence of their name in Auschwitz. And that means to me that they have never been registered. So they were marched directly, were taken to the gas chamber. Also, 90% of the Hungarian transport. We arrived in Auschwitz end of May of 1944. A week later was D-Day. The Nazis already knew that they were losing the war, yet they were still bent on killing as many Jews as they could. Somehow, up to that time, we thought that we, the Hungarian Jews, would be spared, but it didn't work. Any other questions?
My name is Eva Kor. I'm here at my class. And my question was, how did you found the museum, the Candlelight
How did I find what?
Like you said, you founded the Candlelight Museum, right?
How did I found the organization?
Yeah.
How did I? Well, I will tell you, I had a lot of problems as I was by 1978, I began lecturing, and people would ask me about the details of the experiments. Well, we didn't know. They injected us, took blood from us. That's all we really knew. Nobody ever explained what they were doing to us. So I decided, since there were no books written about us, there was no information. I had that liberation picture, which is on the front of the books that we are selling outside. I had the picture because I got the film from Auschwitz in 1978. I wanted to know how I looked. I didn't remember. We never had a mirror to look. I knew how my sister looked, and she looked very skinny. So I thought if I could locate all these children in the picture, that we could sit down and have a discussion and piece together our memories. But where do you find people you haven't seen in 39 years? There was no internet. So actually it took me 6 years, because at the beginning I wrote letters to members of the media, and I sent out 4 letters a year for 6 years. I could not give up the idea that these children who were liberated with me lived somewhere, and maybe it would be a wonderful thing to know how did their lives turn out. Were they having as many health problems as my sister was? And then nothing happened. I didn't get anywhere. No reporter was answering my questions or writing about us, because I knew that it was the media that was going to help me publicize the fact that I was looking for the other twins. And in December of 1983, I was washing the dishes by hand. And I thought to myself, what if I formed an organization and made myself president? Wouldn't the media be impressed? So I said, yes. I am impressed when I get a letter signed by somebody president. So I formed the organization. I made myself president. I named my twin sister, Miriam, vice president for Israeli survivors. And she said, what do you do all these big, big things? I said, just publicize somewhere in Israel, go to a reporter. And I knew that most of the survivors would be living in Israel. And my brother-in-law put in he was a journalist. He put in a little ad in the major newspaper, Front Page Center. And that yielded us immediately, within 1 week, 80 names. And then my sister said to me, now you have those, I have those names. What do I do with them? So I flew to Israel, and we had our first press conference in Tel Aviv. The truth was that all these children who survived had, as grown-ups now, had a lot of health problems. And we were hoping at that time that we would get maybe a lot more support and people would get involved. But we got very, very little support from the media after that, or from any organization. And it would have helped, at least I can tell you one thing, that I gave most of these survivors an identity. They knew why they were. So if they had a problem that they couldn't talk to their family members, their husband, they could call another twin and talk about it, because we understood each other's problems. And today, most of the twins won't talk to me who are still alive, because I forgave the Nazis. And they feel that I betrayed something. And I don't know why. I keep asking them, how did I hurt them? So it's very difficult to be a leader in what you're trying to do. As long as you agree with everybody, They are going to love you. But once you go out on something that you believe in, and that doesn't fit their mentality, you're a pariah. So today I am a pariah with the Mengele twins. And I'm very sad because most of them, today I visited with them in Israel in 2010. They are on tranquilizers and antidepressants. I don't need any tranquilizer. I don't need any antidepressant. But they are running away from their problems and their memories. I am facing them head on. I hope I answered your question. Wonderful.
I was wondering if, at all, during that time, if you remember, if you did feel your twins' pain, because I sometimes feel that.
If I could feel her pain? What I can tell you about being a twin in Auschwitz, which to me it's important to talk about, we were in a place where it was a dog-eat-dog world. Walking over dead bodies was a daily thing because you couldn't concentrate on the dead. If you concentrated on what we saw, we would not have enough energy to survive. But in all that miserable world, I could always cuddle up with my sister. And the fact is that I was willing to risk my life to organize potatoes for her. But she was also willing to risk her life because when I was in the hospital, there was no food. And after my fever broke, Miriam heard from the lady who arrived with us together, Mrs. Chengeri, that I was fainting not only from disease but from hunger. And she saved her bread for 1 week to send it to me with Mrs. Chengeri. And we never talked about it until 1985. And in 1985, she said to me, "Did you get the bread?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And I was very embarrassed, a very belated thank you. But can you imagine the willpower of a 10-year-old child to save her bread for 1 week so I would have some bread? Now, the other thing is, once I donated my kidney, and that is the only thing I can explain. When Miriam developed cancer, and it was when she got really very sick by 1992, I remember calling her on Passover. Well, there was no answer. I called her for another reason, because I had 3 nights in a row a strange nightmare that I was shopping with Miriam in some kind of a shopping center, and she collapsed. And she was bleeding from her nose, from her ears, from her mouth, from just about everywhere there was blood coming out. And that nightmare repeated the 3rd night, and then I was really concerned. I could not get an answer at home. On Passover night, they were always at home. So I called a few hours later. Finally, I got a hold of my brother-in-law, and I said, "Where is Miriam? Could I talk to Miriam?" He said, "No, she's in the hospital. She is a cancer metastasized everywhere, and she's bleeding from everywhere." And so they sent her home. I brought her to United States for chemotherapy. The same doctor that treated my son treated Miriam. And I drove her to Indianapolis, and she was coughing up blood continuously. And I was just praying, because I didn't know what else to do, that I would get her to the hospital still alive. And she asked the doctor, "Doctor, how much of a chance do I have to survive?" The doctor said, 2%. He said, I take 2% is better than no percent. And she lived on chemotherapy for 9 months. She was in the United States for 3 months, then she went back to Israel. But the cancer returned in 1993, and this time it killed her immediately. Okay, any other questions?
Thank you.
You're
I am wondering if you know of other forgiveness stories from...
well, not survivors. There are, I know only of one survivor who said she forgave, and she lives in St. Louis, but she said that it was politically involved when she was against the Vietnam War. She realized that some other people aren't, and that she needed to forgive those people who were for the war. She wasn't for the war because she realized that maybe in life, in order to get over our animosity towards certain people, that helped her get over her animosity politically against other people. But then she also forgave the Nazis. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Maria. I'm a master's student for history, and I just finished my undergrad. And during my undergrad, I wrote a paper about the difference of the experience of male Holocaust victims and female Holocaust victims. And
Was there a difference?
there was, yes, I actually used your documentary in my paper. And I was wondering if you knew of any difference between the experience of the male twins and the female twins.
I will, by the way, I just remembered something. I don't know if there is one interesting story that the male twins, not because they are male, survived in much better physical and emotional conditions than the girl twins. There was a grown-up twin whose name was Zvi Spiegel. He was 32 years old when he arrived with his twin sister. He was already a grown man, and he decided that he was going to intercede in behalf of the younger twins. He went up to Mengele, he spoke very good German, and said, you want good guinea pigs? You better give them better food. And he also taught the twins each other's names, because we were completely emotionally and physically isolated. I don't remember the names of too many twins in our barrack. The survival takes over everything. There is no room for camaraderie. He taught each other's name. He taught them arithmetic and geography to keep their minds alert. He made little soccer balls, footballs, out of rags and took them outside to kick a ball around to keep their spirits up. And he told them, if you survive, I will take you home myself. And he did. So when I put together the organization of the Mengele twins, that story surfaced. Everybody was asking about Zvi Spiegel. I met him, still lived in Israel, and all these people were telling these stories. Now, unfortunately, when you read some books, you will hear, the one book that's available that I read is Dr. Nisli's book. He was Mengele's pathologist, and he went to visit the boy twins. And he wrote in his book that twins had much better conditions. He assumed that that was true for the girls' twins, but it wasn't. There was no one taking care of us. So That is one thing. The other thing, as you were asking if anybody forgave, I forgot. There is an amazing story of this young boy. His name is now Peter Greenfeld. I knew him very well because he lived in the same town that my sister lived, and every time I visited Miriam, Peter was there. Peter was a very nervous person. He had a lot of stomach problems. He was 4 years old when he arrived in Auschwitz. And the very young children, and I have discovered that as I was meeting with the twins, those who were between the ages of 2 and 7 developed severe stomach problems and anxiety problems because all their early childhood was nothing but a nightmare. The other problem that many of them who were the 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 years old, they didn't have an identity. They did not remember anything from their past. So in this case, Peter Greenfeld was liberated. He was 5 years old. He was picked up by a survivor from the Soviet Union and taken back with him to the Soviet Union. As we are talking today, there is a guy by the name of Menacher Bodner. He was picked up by survivors. He was also 5 years old when the camp was liberated. And he had a twin brother that he's still looking for. Now, Peter grew up in the Soviet Union. He got married, and and had 3 children. In 1979, he wanted to immigrate to Israel. He had no birth certificate. He had nothing about his past. So his wife said, well, you have your number on the arm. Let's write to the Auschwitz Museum. And the Auschwitz Museum responded that his name was Joseph Kleinman, arrived together with a little girl who was born the same date in 1940, Martha Kleinman, and they were given this number and he was given this number. And he arrived together with his mother and an older sister by the name of Emma. Where the Czech camp was eliminated in 1944, so only the twins survived. Because he got the document, he could prove who he was, and he got a visa to Israel. Peter Greenfeld, he was very clever. I met with him in 2010, and he said, my name is Peter Joseph Kleinman Greenfeld. So he has everything in his name. I was very, very surprised how well he did. Among all the twins, he was not on tranquilizers. He was not on antidepressant. He said, 2 years ago, I told my doctor, I want to get rid of the antidepressants and tranquilizers. I want to live my life. And he now runs tours to Auschwitz once a year for seniors in high school. He said, I haven't quite reached forgiveness, but I understand what you are talking about it, and I am heading in that direction. It's the only one and probably the person I would have never expected to forgive. So it's a journey, I guess. Maybe in some way he was suffering so much, and that was the only way to rise above all that pain. Because I suffered a lot. All right, I think we are going to finish the questions. Very good questions, very intelligent group. Thank you very much. And I want to tell you that we have a wonderful One more, okay. Okay, I am not going to.
The last one.
Okay, the last one, okay.
My name is Stacy Snyder. I'm a librarian here. And when you mentioned Dr. Munch, I was confused because I was like, why was in one of only 40 staff members tried in the Auschwitz trial.
In Krakow, right.
That was actually acquitted and, called the good doctor.
Yeah, he was called the good Nazi.
Yeah,
The good.
and then I read a little bit later that he made some very disparaging comments in the late 90s that were really
That is a disgrace of Steven Spielberg that he did that film, The Last Nazi. They knew. I have actually I was the only one who had Dr. Munch's Nazi picture. That is incorrect. That what Dr. Munch was already legally suffering from dementia and Alzheimer's. I went and met with him. And I can prove it because I recorded him. But nobody cared. Steven Spielberg had a script and he wanted to fulfill that script. And he created more animosity between people. You know what happened? He gave that interview to a reporter, Der Spiegel magazine. Der Spiegel magazine published an article with Dr. Munch's home address in a national magazine. Dr. Munch's house was firebombed 3 times. Dr. Munch didn't even care. He didn't know what was going on. But his children had to deal with the problems that created. That film, The Last Nazi, is a disgrace. And by the way, the woman that Steven Spielberg picked, Renee Zitblatt, I think it's her name, I met her. There is no way that she's an Auschwitz survivor. She does not have a tattoo. She told me Mengele injected some kind of a dye in it and the tattoo disappeared. Was I born on the moon? Now, why? I think that the distortion of the truth about Dr. Munch. It's a big distortion, but I am just here, a little survivor in Terre Haute, Indiana. Mr. Spielberg is a big producer. He has the power to produce whatever he wants. I think it's a distortion and dishonest, in my opinion.
And I'd actually never heard of that. I was just, sitting up here in the stands, and I was just curious who he was.
Use your mic, will you? Use a mic. So we can
My
hear
mic
you.
doesn't work.
Can you hear me? Oh, now it is. Okay, I apologize. No, I had never heard of Dr. Munch, and I was researching and seeing, and my question was more geared toward how did that affect your path of forgiveness, but it's interesting.
No, it didn't.
I want to find out more.
Well, Dr. Munch often said to me, I wasn't as bad as the others. And I said to him, I'm forgiving Mengele, so who can be worse than Mengele? So yeah, I mean, you want to feel good but the truth is that Dr. Munch, I found out way after that, saved 30 inmates from sure death. And I talked to one of those inmate doctors, Dr. Louis McKeel, who at the time was still alive living in Connecticut. And he said, yes, he did some amazing things. I will just share with you 2 things, and then we are going to go on. He said that there was a typhus epidemic, and he needed to inoculate all the people who were in his group that he was experimenting on. And the experiment, by the way, he did was very benign. And actually, with the help of Dr. Louis McKeel, they continued the experiment, fooling the Nazis that this experiment had to be continued until liberation, which was incorrect. But anyway, and if he would have been found out, he would have been hanged. But he said he needed to inject everybody with an anti-typhoid because it was rampant. And he couldn't tell them that this was for your own good. So what he did, he injected himself first. And then everybody knew it was safe. The other thing that I want to tell about Dr. Munch, when we were in Auschwitz, we went into the crematorium. And I always give everybody a candle. I light my candle in the memory of my family and 1.5 million Jewish children who were murdered. But I didn't give one to Dr. Munch because I didn't want to put him on the spot. Well, everybody lights his candles and he comes up to me, Eva, everybody got a candle. How come I didn't get one? I said, well, I didn't really know you wanted one. He said, yes, I do. He went up to the ovens, lit the candle, and said, I light this candle in the memory of all the people I watched die in the gas chamber. And we gasped for air because this was the most meaningful thing that he could have done. Thank you.